Station 51, engine 27, engine 32, truck 105.
You're listening to The Fire Break with Steve Wolf. Welcome back to The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, every episode we explore ways that we can keep ourselves safer from fire or coexist better with fire, or hopefully just reduce the losses that we get from catastrophic wildfire. So this whole area of, how do we do things to our environment? How do we change what's going on around us so that it impacts us better and not as poorly? It's called mitigation. You all know that. Everyone's seen that. So my guest today, Mitchell Zembik, live from Prescott, Arizona, has a company called Get Right Mitigation. Tell me about your company, Mitchell, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. So we started Get Right Mitigation Restoration about 8 years ago now. And we work in a couple of different fields. One of them being water damage, things like that, water damage, mold, restoration, things like that. So we are a general contractor. But one of the areas that we also specialize in is home fires, smoke damage, things like that. So we actually do the mitigation resulting from any kind of fires, whether they be in the home or as we experience a lot here in Prescott, there's been quite a few forest fires that have ended up causing extensive smoke damage to the interior of homes and things like that. So we go in and do the cleanup and removal of all of the necessary areas to make sure that home is back safe and clean of any kind of soot and debris and things like that.
Yeah, this seems to be a metric, that's been obvious in structural fires forever, but only recently being recognized as a factor in wildland fires or structure-to-structure conflagration fires, where they would fly by helicopter and they'd say, okay, well, 20 homes were threatened, 8 homes were burned down. So, there's still 12 homes are still fine, right? And of course, in many cases, the smoke impingement and damage and contamination has rendered those homes just about as unoccupiable as the ones that burned down. And that's really just in the last, month, this is really coming to public consciousness. That just because your house is standing doesn't mean you can live in it. So what are the types of chemicals that smoke carry into homes, and how is that released back from the walls and the surfaces into the breathing air that the people are supposedly having to live with?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the difficulty with any kind of fires and the heating of any kind of materials in the homes. That's one of the bigger things that we see, aside from the just the natural soot and things that's carried through wildfires that end up inside the homes and on the drywall and stuff. That's not healthy for breathing in itself. But outside of that, then you get just because it didn't burn the home, it was close enough to it where you get a lot of heat up of vinyl window coverings, different things like that, paint, countertops, all of these different products that are in your home, on your home, the exteriors. They have coatings and things that ultimately, once they're heated up, they're now releasing those chemicals into your home, into the air vents, ducting, everything inside the home. And so that stuff, it doesn't just go away. It clings to the walls. It, sticks in the duct systems and the ventilation and everything. And so you end up having these carcinogens that are, like you said, it makes a home, inoccupable, because ultimately you can't really live inside of a home that is filled with different carcinogens, aside from just the soot and debris that can be difficult and complicated on the lungs itself. But because of those different materials and what they're made with, the heat ends up releasing those and causing big issues for the home not to be able to live in.
So in a mitigation that you do where you try to go and remove as much of those compounds as you could, to the human nose, is it ever really, really clean after that, minus the possible benefit of masking some of the odors? Can you ever get it to the point where people don't walk in there and say, oh, you guys had a fire?
That's kind of the complication. One of the things that we learn when we're dealing with fire mitigation and cleaning homes and stuff after, whether it be forest fires or just a building fire, home fire, whatever, there is a phantom smell that is well known when it comes to fires because ultimately because it was there. Now if it's people coming into your home for the first time, then a lot of times, no, we're able to get that smell out, those odors out, depending on what's needed for removal, whether it's complete removal of materials or just being able to treat it for odor and such and clean it. But from the outside perspective, if you've never been inside the home before and known that it was there, the chances are, yes, we may be able to get it fully out where you don't know. Now, for the homeowner who has been in there and knows that it was there and knows what it smells like, a lot of times that's what we run into is that phantom smell that they end up coming back in and I can still smell it. When you could have 15 other people walk in and say, I don't smell anything. It smells perfect in here. And it's a complete psychological factor of knowing that that's what took place. And the last time they were there, their brain is telling them, that's the odor that they're supposed to be looking for. And so they're so in tune to it that sometimes even if it's not non-existent, it still exists to them.
Wow. And even if maybe it's not smoke they're smelling, they certainly could be triggered, by the idea that it doesn't smell the way it used to, right? It doesn't have the smell of
Absolutely.
their dog on the carpet or their baby powder in the changing room or whatever, right? There were a lot of smells that are accused to this is home. And when you change
Right.
that environment significantly, so maybe they're not still smelling smoke, but it doesn't smell like home.
Right. Yeah. It's just not a natural smell, right? You could have, depending on the age of the home, I mean, it could be 5 years or 50 years, 100 years worth of scents and just the natural home that you're used to, that you've lived in for years. And ultimately that's what you know. And now all of a sudden you smell, whether it be chemicals or no smell, no odor whatsoever, just like you said. Now all of a sudden it doesn't have that home smell. You don't have the same, relevance in your mind of, okay, yes, like you said, I don't smell my animals. I don't smell that old home smell that we used to smell when we walked in here. So it definitely can play tricks on the mind for sure.
Interesting. Is most of your work just post-fire mitigation? Or are you doing
Um,
pre-mitigation as well?
most of our work is post, just as a result of what we do business wise. We have had clients in the past because we do this type of work. We have gotten calls in the past to do safety debris removal and stuff around the house just to create that safe space around the property. So we have done a little bit of that, not a ton. I grew up here in Prescott, Arizona, for most of my life, and we're known for a lot of different hotshot crews and things like that have come out of this area. And so I've been around that quite a bit of creating that defensible space and things like that. We've lived in the forest multiple times, as I was growing up. With family and now myself with my family, where ultimately, the importance of creating that defensible space around the house definitely makes a difference in making things easier for, when they do have a situation, they're able to not have as high of a risk, with your property and the property surrounding you.
Yeah. So how would you say the mix is? Not just within your business, but within the market? I would imagine once people have had a fire come through, demand's pretty inflexible, right? Like you can't live in there until somebody does what you do, whereas you could certainly live in your house without having pre-mitigation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, that's kind of the complication, right? Is getting it across to people. I think, the city of Prescott and the county and all, here, Yavapai County, they do a pretty good job now, trying to really press that home just because of the fires and things that we've had and the losses that we've suffered, with buildings. We've been very fortunate, over the last 20 years. We've had some decent sized fires, but haven't had a ton of loss of structure. So it was more so being rendered not occupable being able to stay in the home for that purpose, of what we do after the fact. They've really tried to push that as, as the emergency side of things. You really need to create that defensible space. So yeah, that I would say that's the big issue, that we still face is there's a lot of homeowners, that think of that as, I don't want to necessarily spend that money. I don't, it's expensive to have somebody come out and create this space. It's just brush. It's, whatever the case may be. And they're ultimately, until you've been affected by it or had someone close to you affected by it, where you work in an industry that is affected by it, it just doesn't seem as big of an issue as it is once you've been affected by it. And then the reality sets in. If I would have paid X amount of dollars and had this defensible space created around me, maybe
Right.
my home would still be here, or maybe the fire wouldn't have been so hot where all of this damage occurred to my home, the exterior, whatever, even if it wasn't a complete loss. There's definitely things that could have been made easier and better for you, and maybe gotten back into your home quicker if those things would have taken place.
Yeah. And when you describe, what's happened to these homes, their high heat exposure and all the surfaces that, VOCs may be sticking to, or other chemicals that were released. And when I think through the physics of that, it really comes down to surface area, right? How much surface area is there for stuff to stick to? So I would imagine that you walk into two different homes, and you could probably anticipate which is going to be a worse smoke mitigation situation, right? And I would think things like wall-to-wall carpet, that's going to hold somewhat, right? That's got to go. Yeah, and even like maybe central heat and air, where you have all that ductwork, versus a home that had hardwood floors and mini splits. Right.
Absolutely. No, that definitely is a big differentiator, right? It's actually kind of even funny, something as simple as having, vaulted ceilings, and having more space in the home, right? It just creates another avenue of thought that we have to go through in order to get that home back to a livable space. And so, yeah, when you're dealing, you see a small cabin that, has all wood floors throughout it, and there's not a lot of textures and things on the walls for things to stick to. You can walk into that one and say, okay, this one's going to be a little bit easier of a project. Then you go into a home that's just full wall to wall with drywall, carpet in the rooms. Like you said, it's going to hold on to all of that. Even depending on what type of siding, the home has, can make a huge difference in what it is that we're having to do, because of the ability for it to stick to it. Raw woods and things that haven't been sealed and treated for years on end on older properties. Obviously, that's going to be a little bit more of a possibility of having those different things stick to that surface and hold it in that surface, making it more porous, of course. So it definitely can make a huge difference.
Yeah. So I guess you have, varying degrees of bad, based one, maybe on external smoke impingement, and then two, on the temperatures that were achieved inside the house. Right. I would imagine that raw untreated wood or older wood, would create more surfaces for stuff to stick to, right? Versus a treated surface. But if it was a treated surface with polyurethane or something and that heated, then that's a whole new source of problems. So quite a balancing act you have there.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, there's goods and bads to both sides, right? Like you said, things that are already porous and have the ability to absorb, chemicals and the different things in the air that come with fires. You're ultimately, in a bad place there, but at the same time, you're not creating new chemicals, so to speak, in the air that are being released as a result. Whereas, like you said, if it's coated with any kind of coatings, or, God forbid you have vinyl siding or something like that on the home, that in itself, as soon as that gets, to a certain point, you're going to be releasing all of those chemicals that are in that vinyl siding, just as an example. And that can now get inside of the home. That can go through, the window cavities. people think that their homes are very tightly sealed until a fire comes through, and then all of a sudden you start looking around your house and you go by a window and run your finger across, the ledge, and all of this soot and everything is just across it. And they're like, I thought my home was like just a sealed envelope. And except, well, that's not how fires work. That's not how the pressures and everything work. And if there's a way in, it will find its way in. Those seals are not perfect. On top of the fact that, once your heat gets to a certain point, those seals have a tendency to fail. And it ends up, finding its way in that way.
So, and insurance companies ultimately are the ones who pay for this post-fire mitigation. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, as long as there's coverage for it, which in most cases, with today's day and age, and obviously the concerns that we've seen with coverages being dropped as a result of where you live in the forest and things like that, they basically don't really allow for it anymore if you live out there to not have that type of coverage, just because it is such a high possibility that something like that could happen again, even if it's not your home that burns, if it's just the forest near you and the wrong wind is blowing that day, now all of a sudden you're in effect to the same. So we have I would say more so probably a 90 to 95% is covered by the carrier in regards to the claim itself, and then the other 5 is whether they are paid off and don't have coverage or simply just couldn't find coverage. We do run into some of those, but it's more the rarity.
So if this smoke impingement, smoke damage, presence of lots of bad chems in the home makes it unlivable and becomes an expense to the insurance companies. Insurance companies are barely at the point now, it seems, where they're even advocating sufficiently for pre-mitigation, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
Right. And whether doing pre-mitigation results in a lower premium for you is still something that's kind of working its way through the industry. More and more, I'm happy to say, but, by no means universally. So if insurance companies can't get homeowners to do pre-mitigation, is there any movement towards pre-smoke impingement mitigation where they say, okay, if you do these things, your home might not burn down, but even if it doesn't burn down, here are the additional expenses we're going to face as an insurance company. Here are things that you could do to reduce the cost of a post-fire mitigation to speed up the process of you being able to get back in your home and lower the cost to the insurance company of this post-mitigation. Are there things that can be done?
There are some things. Again, I think it's all relative to the situation of the fire. As you know, fires have a mind of their own. When you think that they're going to do one thing, that's usually the opposite of what they end up doing. And so being able to truly prepare for that and how close they end up getting to your house, the heat factors, all of the variations that come with that can make it incredibly difficult. Now, again, if your home is an older home and you don't have any type of sealant and things around your windows, everything is exposed, and you can feel air getting in already. Any of those things, if you have the ability to seal those up the best that you can, if it's just a matter of wind travel, and the smoke and such, smoke, soot, chemicals coming via wind instead of being right on top of your home, then yes, I would say ultimately having those tight seals, having newer windows with tighter seals, having proper sealants, caulking, silicones, and things around the windows can help keep those things out of the home. If there is a fire nearby, not utilizing your HVAC system or your furnace, allowing it to pull that stuff that's in the air through the system. Yes, there's filters, but the reality is they're not meant to stop all of that. There's only so much that will get stopped coming through. So, there are certain things that you can do. As far as the insurance side of it goes and telling people any of that, I haven't seen it. I haven't really seen anyone that's been like, we have coverage, and luckily because they told us to do A through Z, it wasn't as bad. the only thing I've seen is more in reference to what you were talking, again, the defensible space and such. They have an independent adjuster or inspector come out and take photos and say, you need to clear X amount of space around your home or else you get dropped or we won't cover you until that's done. That's more of the common that we've heard and seen. As far as the other side of it, we really haven't seen. I think it's very similar, I would say. Like you said, it's a new thing to the carriers that they're trying to push now because of the mass losses that they have occurred, whether it be, the fires in California, Colorado, Arizona, all of these different places that have had really bad fires over the years. They're just now really starting to catch up to, let's try and be proactive about this. But ultimately, I equate it to similar to asbestos. The insurance carriers still to this day, when we present an asbestos quote to them in regards to, we're certified in asbestos removal and abatement. When we provide a quote for something like that, the insurance carriers have no idea what to do with it. And it's because it's just something that they kind of just left as we don't talk about it over the years until it comes up. And then now more and more you're having these older homes with floods in them, fires in them, all of these different things. And now it's an issue. And so now it's becoming something that's talked about. But ultimately they don't have any kind of preemptive, hey, you could have this removed. We want you to do this or have this coated or anything like that really protects from that situation. I feel like it's the same in regards to fire and smoke damage. They're just not really being very proactive about telling their insured what potentially could help them in that situation.
Why do you think that industry, you might not have any idea, but why do you think they're so slow to catch on with giving people advice that they might actually want to follow? And they probably won't. Ultimately, you could tell people, do these 10 things, and maybe they do, one or one and a half of them, and then they forget. But so maybe they don't tell people because they don't listen in the first place. Maybe
and it very well could be.
Right.
Yeah, I think that probably.
Yeah. Or they might say, here are the things that have to be done. We're going to go ahead and do it for you, and the cost will just be rolled into your premium.
Right. And I think that may be an avenue that would be more advantageous because one of my favorite sayings is, you can lead the horse to the water, you can't make him drink it. And that's, ultimately what we're talking about here. You can tell them, yes, these things need to be done. This would help. This would proactively make things better for you where potentially you're not out of your home at all or more minimally in time. And so, I think there is things that they could do. I'm not sure why they're not more proactive. I think it's similar. Again, I equate it similar to the asbestos conversation. I think it's a lack of knowledge. I think the carriers in the first place have a lack of knowledge for the information to say what could make it better, and whether that's just they haven't spent the time and effort yet to do that, or they just don't care. I'm not sure. Obviously, it ends up costing them more money, so you would think that it would be advantageous, but I do think that there's a gap there where, there's just a lack of knowledge at the end of the day of things that could make it better. And they've grasped onto that defensible space as, trying to keep from complete loss of structure, but ultimately nothing towards the avenue of, fire and smoke damage, and cleanup inside of the home itself or the structure itself.
Yeah, it feels like maybe insurance companies are so big, these massive juggernauts, and this is how we do things. And with 100,000 employees, even imagining how we would do things differently just seems like such a cumbersome thing. And as a result, now you have new, young insurance companies popping up that are really very focused on this specific, that aren't gauging fire risk by your zip code, but by your parcel, right? That it's changing, and I guess really we wonder, like, are big insurance companies going to change with this, or are they going to be left behind, or do they think, oh, we're too big to become irrelevant?
Yeah, and I think it could
Yeah.
be a little bit of both. I do think it's sad, but I think that their answer to the equation here has been, at least recently, to just not cover.
Hmm.
And that's obviously, I think, the opposite of the answer. I think that, the only people that suffer from that truly are the owners of those properties, who aren't able to find adequate coverage, or are forced to go with astronomical costs for coverage because they're so limited on who they can choose from. But I think that's where maybe that cost factor comes in with these larger carriers. Is it would be such a high cost for us to train our people in all of this, and have them know, what they need to know to do it, that our answer is, now we don't want to spend that money. We'll just not cover. Well, if you're in that area, or in a situation where we feel like the risk is, factored at whatever that is for them, we just won't cover it, instead of how do we proactively keep these people covered and do right by them, while still, again, at the end of the day, they're paying premiums to you. They're
Right.
making money for you. So it's not like they're, you're giving all this money away. These people are paying for that service at the end of the day. So it's not like it's a one-sided venture. You're able to cover them better and have more adequate coverage for them, and keep their premiums lower across the board, as well as keep your cost and mitigation of this exponential value that you're putting into these properties, by not having them, adequately set up, or the knowledge of what they should be doing prior to an event. I think it's a disservice to the community, at the end of the day.
Yeah, very much so. To everyone, really, right? Because when you write off an entire zip code, you're losing a huge source of revenue as an insurance company. And if you could do that at the parcel level and say, well, this home is too much of a risk. With that home across the street, they've done all the mitigation work. Right? They've gotten the trees away. They kept the grass short. They, removed all the flammables from their zone zero. Put in their vents, all those things, right? Then that home might be an excellent risk candidate for insurance. And I wonder,
Absolutely.
why we're seeing such a huge divergence between the way homeowner insurance works and the way health insurance works. Not that anyone thinks that health insurance is done perfectly in America, probably, or anywhere else. But your insurance company say, that's, you don't want to do your home mitigation. Okay, you don't want to stop smoking. Okay, that's fine. There's a premium associated with that. Right? You quit smoking? Great, your premium goes down. You move the bushes away from your windows, premium goes down. So it seems like, while they're both considerably imperfect systems, that health insurance at least is tied to your health, or and to your health choices, I should say, right? If you have pre-existing conditions, congenital issues, like, that's not your fault. You can't fix that. But
Right.
but most of our health conditions are as a resulting of choices we make, or choices we choose not to make. And
Absolutely.
insurance recognizes
Self-inflicted.
that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you go to a property, um, what are the big things on your list? I'm guessing that there's some diminishing returns on the stuff that you can do in your mitigation, right? Rip out the carpet, huge return. Wash the walls a little bit less. Dig around inside the furnace vents even less. What are the big strokes that you can take in there?
Yeah, I think, again, each property is a little bit different, but yes, I think, the big things, are definitely carpet. Anything that absorbs, or is a very porous surface that's going to absorb the chemicals, the scents, all of those things. Those are going to be the biggest things that make a difference. So whether it be not having those things in the first place, for the potential, if something were to happen, your your situation could be a lot less invasive. Um, but ultimately, if you do have those things, those are going to be the big areas that end up being affected, and having the biggest bang to have that home get back to a stable state for somebody to actually go in there and not have that smell, to not have that concern. Walls, it really just depends on the severity. We've had many homes where, yes, we can go in and wash the walls and coat them, which the bad part about coating them right and sealing them in is you're not getting rid of it. You're just masking the issue, so to speak, which of course is what a lot of the carriers prefer. They don't want to pay for all the drywall to be removed out of a home for the purposes of then having to re-put it back in. And so a lot of times they're requesting, that be sealed in with an oil-based kind of sealant in order to keep that odor and such, from coming back through, which over time is kind of inevitable. Now, timeline-wise, it's quite a long time that it takes for it to happen, but you're not truly getting rid of it in that case. So it can be difficult when it comes to wall systems and things like that. The difficulty is a lot of people don't really see this, but countertops, having these porous countertops that that people just don't really think about, whether they be rock or granite that's not a fine polished finish. A lot of that can hold odors and things in it. So it's really the biggest avenue that we look for is removing the key causes that are going to hold on to those carcinogens, those chemicals, those odors as quickly as possible. Once those things are out, then it's kind of almost like a reset button. Now that we have those things out of here, let's reassess the situation and try and make sure we're not missing anything. Cleaning duct work and your HVAC system and all is pretty much a guarantee. Anytime something like this happens, to not do it, you're going to have an issue at that point. So I would say between carpet removal and porous surface removal and having your system, HVAC, furnace, and the ducting and all inside the home cleaned and properly cleaned by a professional, those are going to be the biggest things that we usually see the return of having the safety return back to the home the quickest.
It seems like historically, some of the things that were done in building code, so to speak, stone buildings, masonry, marble floors, like those things were good for both not burning and for not retaining smoke damage. I haven't heard any risk of fire damage to the pyramids.
Right. No, absolutely. Right.
I'm sure fires, flood, everything's come through there, but they make the upfront investment in some pretty heavy duty construction, and then you get to enjoy that for literally millennia.
Right. No, absolutely. Well, and you see it in homes all the time. Even in commercial structures, you have, all of these things that are built with wood that are stick built, and all of those things burn. And then you have an elevator shaft that's still standing in the middle of the rubble, and it's concrete, it's, brick, whatever it may be, or a fireplace stack that everything on the property burned, but yet this beautiful fireplace is still standing.
Right.
There is something to that. Now, obviously, the cost associated with building that way is much more significant nowadays, I think, in comparison to what it used to be. The supply and demand for making that and creating all of that has grown so much that I definitely think that that's part of the reason why people don't use it, is because it's a more expensive. But at the end of the day, if you want the protection of not having your property burn, it's a lot less likely when you build out of things like that than if you're building a stick-built home or property or shed building, whatever it may be. The structure does stand a better chance when you're utilizing products like that that do have sealed surfaces and such, and ultimately just stand up to heat, they stand up to fire, all of those things better.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of building out of huge granite blocks, or even sandstone, or whatever the materials are in your area. And you'd think that given that you might benefit from a $15,000 or $20,000 a year premium reduction, that eventually that is going to compensate for the cost of more expensive but more permanent building materials.
Absolutely. And that would be one of those things, again, I think, if we go back to the discussion we were having regarding, having this home not be covered because of X, Y, and Z in comparison to this one across the street. I think it would. Ultimately, if they took that into account, well, this home is block. The chances of it having the same issues as this one across the street, being in the same exact neighborhood or the same forest or same circumstances, is just, not as great. So, expanding coverage to someone like that, or having less premiums and giving benefits to someone in that situation in comparison, I think, I'm not sure if they'll do it, but I think they should. They should. It's at least a discussion that should be had.
Yeah. And it seems like people who do something that's not your standard, stick frame building, like that's so exceptional that it's remarkable, right? And, if somebody in your home or someone in your neighborhood let's say, puts up a rammed earth building, like, oh, wow, that's so novel. That was written up in, Eco Green Builder magazine or something. Right.
Right.
Whereas that should be the norm. It should be not exceptional. But really, it's, that's outlier behavior to build a properly resilient house.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Obviously back in the day, right, you made reference to the pyramids. I mean, you look at most of the old structures around the country over time, most of them were made more fireproof than anything that's made today. And I think, again, like we discussed, the cost factor of those materials and the increase in, the I don't even know that it necessarily costs anymore to make, produce, or anything like that. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think it's just a matter of they know they can charge more for it, and so they do. In some instances, that's why they've gotten away from it and had this choice to go with, with stick-built homes and structures and stuff over the years. But it definitely has not done any service to the people that live in those areas that are dealing with these fires and situations like that.
Yeah. What are some of the other things that you look at on a pre-mitigation basis that as you walk through a home or look at the outside of a home and you're looking at, oh, yeah, they have no idea what that bucket of kerosene is going to do to their home when it goes up. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, I mean, anytime we're doing an inspection like that, where we've had somebody request, for us to come out and look at things that may be an issue for them moving forward. Again, we don't get that a ton, but, there's the people that are proactive that are trying for that. Things as simple as, your wood pile for your fireplace. A lot of people don't have the notion that, yes, it's great that it's 5 feet away from the house and I can walk out in the snow and grab that log and bring it back in. And, they just don't have the forethought to say, this could be the reason my home burns, and as opposed to not. Again, you mentioned, flammables and things being around, having, being in their garage and such, not having a flammable cabinet that can try and at least mitigate some of that potential for loss by having it in there. Again, those only have such such a high level of rating, when it comes to temperature and such, but it at least gives you some level of protection. And so we usually will recommend things like that. Obviously, as a business, we're required to do things like that. If we don't have, and they come in and they do an inspection on my business, for instance, and we have all of our flammables out on shelves and things like that, they will dock us for that. That is something that goes against our premium, as you guys aren't prepared. If your business were to have an issue, this is going to be a bigger issue. Your building's going to explode at this point in comparison. And so pointing those things out, things that we've just learned from being in business and having our own inspection requirements, and trying to get them to understand, if you use a chemical blocker like that, it could potentially help keeping distance between your your firewood and things like that from the home, on top of the defensible space of your grass and your low-lying shrubs and trees that are, 40 feet tall that you don't really think, oh, well, I mean, it's pretty far away. Well, not if it burns and falls the 40 feet that it's in the air. Your home's only 20 feet away from it. That's going to fall on top of potentially. So yeah, there's just a lot of forethought into that. But those are the things that we try and point out, just to be aware of, because most people don't have that thought in their mind, aside from the fact that they always think it's never going to happen to me. That's a common thought, I think, whether it be fires or health issues or whatever it is across the board. That won't happen to me. But at the end of the day, the chances are very high nowadays. And so it's just something to really pay close attention to.
And then as fire is coming up the hill and you see the glow and you can see your house in the path, and there's things that you need to be doing at that moment, spending time to think, I can't believe this is happening, is just wasting time, right? It's better to get up every morning and say, today could be the day it happens, and I'm ready for it.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
I knew this could happen. Right? We all knew this was a risk. I've anticipated some of the things that go wrong. I've mitigated against them. And that doesn't make me safe. It makes me safer. And it makes me more able to respond, quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and it's no different than, they talk about, emergency personnel talk about having, during these fire seasons and such, having a go bag, having things already kind of in a way that you can take them and go quickly, right? Because naturally our first instinct, and not that it's at anyone's fault, it is truly a natural instinct. This is my memories. This is my everything I've worked for, everything from family heirlooms and all of this different stuff, right? That's our first instinct, is save ourselves, save our animals, save our belongings, everything that we can, and then go, having that, again, preparedness to know, I'm doing these things proactively to know that if the situation occurs, then I'm ready. One of my other favorite sayings is a failure to plan is a plan to fail. And this is no different when it comes to, being fire ready. If you don't plan for what could happen, and you're one of those who just believes it's never going to happen to me, you're going to be the one who potentially, God forbid, ends up being caught in the fire because you didn't leave quick enough, or losing more than you should because you just weren't really planning for and prepared for what could have been.
Yeah, that's human nature is probably our biggest enemy in these things.
Very much so.
Yeah. When the fire is rolling up the hill and you are evacuating, are there things that you can do as you're leaving, such as turning off the central air and heat, other things like that will minimize the amount of post mitigation that's necessary if your home is still standing when you get back?
Absolutely. So I would say that the HVAC system is probably your number one issue when it comes to that. And obviously that's probably the last thought as you're running out the door, is go check the thermostat and switch it off. But because that is a central line to your home and the interior of your home, that it is physically sucking air from outside and utilizing that air in order to bring it into the house, that if anything else, I would say that is one of the biggest things that I would try and remember, is make sure that your thermostat, make sure that is off, that the system is off. Aside from killing power to the house, obviously, doing shutoffs and things like that can be a big difference, because just having something that could spark and ending up sparking an electrical fire from the fire that ends up, burning the whole house down because you still have electrical to it. That's kind of one of the things that we've actually seen, is even people who have turned their thermostats and stuff off in the past, if it gets hot enough and there's some sort of issue where now it glitches, the possibility that thermostat is not actually what's allowing the system to turn on, it just forces it to go into a constant run mode. Now it's completely against what you tried to accomplish in the first place. So yeah, not just shutting that off, but having, that main shut off to the breaker box, and just, so that it's not even a possibility that heat could be a factor that could cause a system to trip and run constantly when you're not intending it to. I think that's probably the biggest things that we would look for. Aside from that, there's not a ton that you can do in those situations. If you have enough time, obviously, we have a ton of people that, they'll turn their sprinkler systems on full blasts, as it's happening. And yeah, of course you could worry about the water bill and, what's going to come next. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a home to come back to, the water bill is kind of a small
Right.
factor. So we have a ton of people that end up just turning their sprinkler systems to on full bore and trying to get some sort of wet defensible space in that regard, wetting down anything that is potentially a severe cause of having, if those embers and things end up traveling through the air and landing on your roof. A lot of people don't realize that's more of where these fires go wrong than anything. It's not the physical fire being right on top of your house. It's the wind blowing those embers and such from a distance, landing on your roof, landing on the exterior of your home, in the grass and such around it, that ends up causing those issues. So yeah, I mean, those are a few things that can be done to try and minimize the risk of what we're going to end up having to come and do after the fact.
Oi, how about that? It's something. Mitchell, thanks so much for sharing some of your knowledge and experience in this space. I think it's an ignored space largely, in that people are most of the time thinking about nothing. If they're thinking about something in this space, it might have to do with some pre-mitigation, but most people certainly aren't playing that mind game all the way through to the end of what the post-mitigation is going to look like, if there is in fact something left to mitigate. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us and spending this hour together.
Absolutely. No, my pleasure. I greatly appreciate the opportunity. I agree with you. It's definitely a space that's not talked about or communicated enough on. And hopefully, the carriers pick up a little bit of this side of things as well, and expand and broaden that conversation, over the upcoming years, because I think it is something that's incredibly important and could make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again, Mitchell. Mitchell Zembik from Get Right Mitigation in Prescott, Arizona. Thanks so much for joining us, and thank you so much for joining us. Hope you learned something today. I'm Steve Wolf. The Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire. Until I see you next time, think ahead. What's the worst that could happen? That's exactly what it is. Now go do something about it.